Margaret Chen had always believed in staying late. As CEO of Pinnacle Financial, she made it her routine to walk the empty floors after everyone went home. The silence helped her think, and the dim emergency lighting created the perfect atmosphere for planning tomorrow's battles in the corporate world. That Tuesday evening started like any other. Margaret finished reviewing quarterly reports around 9:30, her corner office overlooking the city's twinkling lights. She gathered her things, turned off her computer, and stepped into the hallway. The building felt different after hours, almost alive with secrets. As she walked toward the elevator, she noticed a figure moving near the far end of the corridor. It was Elena Rodriguez, the night janitor. Margaret had seen her countless times but never really paid attention. Tonight was different. Something about Elena's careful, methodical movements caught her eye. Elena pushed her cart with purpose, not the tired shuffle Margaret expected from someone cleaning offices at this hour. She moved like someone who belonged here, like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Her uniform was pristine, her hair pulled back professionally, and she handled each task with surprising precision. Margaret found herself slowing down, watching from a distance. Elena entered the conference room and began cleaning with remarkable attention to detail. She didn't just empty trash cans and wipe surfaces. She examined documents left on the table, straightened papers with care, and seemed to memorize the arrangement of everything in the room. Curiosity overtook professional boundaries. Margaret decided to follow at a safe distance, telling herself she was simply ensuring building security. Elena moved through the executive wing with familiarity that struck Margaret as odd. Most janitors avoided these areas, intimidated by the importance of the offices they cleaned. But Elena was different. She unlocked doors with confidence, knew exactly which offices needed attention, and worked with an efficiency that spoke of intelligence and education. Margaret noticed Elena pause at certain desks, her eyes scanning documents and computer screens that hadn't been properly secured. The CEO felt a chill run down her spine. Was Elena just thorough, or was something else happening here? Margaret's business instincts, sharpened by years of corporate warfare, began sending warning signals. She had built her career on reading people, and Elena Rodriguez was not what she appeared to be. As Elena moved toward the IT department, Margaret made a decision that would change everything. She would follow this mysterious janitor and discover what secrets the night shift was hiding. Little did Margaret know that Elena Rodriguez was about to lead her straight into a past she thought she had buried forever. Elena stopped at a supply closet, looked around carefully, and pulled out a key Margaret had never seen before. The door opened to reveal not cleaning supplies, but a small office space with a desk, computer, and files. Margaret's heart began racing as she realized she was watching something that could destroy everything she had worked to build. The janitor sat down at the computer and began typing with the speed and skill of someone very familiar with corporate systems. Margaret pressed herself against the wall, trying to process what she was witnessing. Elena Rodriguez was not just cleaning offices after hours. She was accessing company information, and she had been doing it right under everyone's nose. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text message, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. Elena's head snapped up, and for a moment their eyes met across the darkness. The janitor's expression changed from concentration to something Margaret couldn't quite identify. Recognition, fear, or perhaps something much more dangerous. In that instant, Margaret realized she had stumbled into something far bigger than corporate espionage. Elena's face held secrets that went beyond stolen information or competitor intelligence. There was history in those eyes, a connection that Margaret felt but couldn't understand. The CEO knew her life was about to become very complicated, but she had no idea how deep the connection between her and Elena Rodriguez really went. Elena Rodriguez closed the computer screen with lightning speed and stood up, her hands shaking slightly. The moment of eye contact with Margaret Chen had lasted only seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. 23 years of careful planning, of building a new identity, of staying invisible, all potentially destroyed by one curious CEO working too late. Margaret stepped out from the shadows, her business instincts taking over despite the shock. She had built Pinnacle Financial by confronting problems head-on, and this situation was no different. The click of her heels on the marble floor echoed through the empty hallway as she approached the hidden office. Elena's mind raced through options. Run, impossible. Margaret knew her face now. Deny everything? The computer screen in hidden office made that pointless. Fight? Not against someone who held all the power in this building. That left only one choice, the truth, or at least part of it. Margaret reached the doorway and looked inside the small space. The office was surprisingly well organized, with financial documents, computer printouts, and what appeared to be investigation notes spread across the desk. Her company letterhead appeared on several papers, along with names she recognized from her executive team. Elena took a deep breath and decided to take control of the conversation. She had learned long ago that confidence could overcome almost any disadvantage. She turned to face Margaret directly, no longer the humble janitor, but someone entirely different. Margaret noticed the transformation immediately. Elena's posture straightened. Her voice became clearer and more educated when she spoke, and the deference that marked her daytime interactions completely disappeared. This was not the same woman who emptied trash cans and mopped floors. Elena introduced herself properly for the first time, explaining that she was not really a janitor, but a private investigator working on a case that involved Pinnacle Financial. Her real name was Elena Rodriguez Stevenson, and she had been investigating financial irregularities that pointed to embezzlement within the company. Margaret felt her world shifting. The woman she had followed was not a threat to her company, but potentially its salvation. Elena had discovered that someone in the executive team was stealing money through a complex series of fake vendor payments and accounting manipulations. But Elena held back the most important part of the truth. She had not been hired by an outside client to investigate Pinnacle Financial. She was there for personal reasons that went back to a time when Margaret Chen was a young accountant named Margaret Williams, working for a different company in a different city. As Elena explained her investigation, Margaret began to see patterns in the financial data that made sense. Missing invoices, vendor payments that didn't quite add up, and accounting entries that seemed designed to hide rather than illuminate. Someone was indeed stealing from her company, and they were very good at it. Elena had been tracking the thief for 6 months, working night shifts to access records without raising suspicion. Her janitorial cover was perfect. Invisible workers who could go anywhere and see everything. She had narrowed the suspects down to 3 people, all of them in Margaret's inner circle. Margaret's business mind took over completely. This was a crisis that could destroy her company if not handled properly, but it was also an opportunity to clean house and strengthen Pinnacle Financial's future. She made a decision that surprised even her. She asked Elena to continue the investigation, but now with official backing. Elena agreed but insisted on maintaining her cover for a few more weeks. The thief was getting careless, making bigger moves that would soon provide the evidence needed for prosecution. Working together, they could catch the criminal and recover the stolen money. As they discussed the details of their collaboration, Margaret felt something familiar about Elena that she couldn't identify. There was a connection, a sense of recognition that went beyond their current situation. Elena seemed to know things about Margaret's management style and decision-making process that went deeper than what any investigator should have discovered. Elena watched Margaret's face carefully, seeing the confusion in the beginning of memory. She knew this moment would come eventually. The past had a way of catching up with everyone. But she wasn't ready to reveal everything yet. Some secrets needed to stay buried until the right moment, and that moment had not arrived. The 2 women agreed to meet the following evening to review Elena's evidence and plan their next steps. As Margaret walked back to her office, she couldn't shake the feeling that Elena Rodriguez was going to change her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. She was right, but the changes would be far more personal and devastating than anything she could have predicted. The next evening, Margaret arrived at the office earlier than usual, her mind buzzing with questions about Elena Rodriguez Stevenson. She had spent the day reviewing personnel files and financial records, trying to understand how someone could steal from her company without detection. The numbers Elena had shown her painted a disturbing picture of systematic theft over several years. Elena was already waiting in the hidden office, surrounded by stacks of documents and computer printouts. She had changed out of her janitor's uniform into professional clothes, and Margaret was struck again by how different she appeared. This was clearly an educated, intelligent woman who had been playing a role for months. Elena spread the evidence across the desk like a detective solving a complex case. Bank statements, forged invoices, altered contracts, and digital records that told a story of careful, methodical embezzlement. Someone had been stealing approximately $15,000 per month for over 3 years, using a network of fake companies and manipulated accounting entries. Margaret studied the documents with growing anger and admiration. Anger at the theft, but admiration for Elena's detective work. The investigation was thorough, professional, and completely convincing. Every piece of evidence was carefully documented and cross-referenced, building an unshakable case against the thief. As Elena explained her methodology, Margaret began to notice details about her speech patterns and mannerisms that seemed familiar. The way Elena organized information, her attention to detail, and her logical approach to problem-solving reminded Margaret of someone from her past. But she couldn't quite place the connection. Elena revealed that the thief was David Morrison, Margaret's chief financial officer and one of her most trusted executives. The evidence was overwhelming. David had created a series of shell companies, forged Margaret's signature on authorization forms, and used his access to company accounts to transfer money to his personal accounts. Margaret felt betrayed and foolish. David Morrison had been with the company for 5 years, had earned her trust through consistent performance, and had access to virtually every financial system in the building. She had promoted him, given him raises, and considered him a key part of her executive team. The thought that he had been stealing from her all this time was devastating, but Elena had more shocking news. David Morrison was not working alone. He had an accomplice inside the company who provided him with information and helped cover his tracks. Elena had identified the accomplice through careful analysis of access logs and communication patterns. The accomplice was Sarah Chen, Margaret's own sister, and the company's human resources director. Margaret felt the world spinning around her as Elena showed her the evidence. Sarah had been feeding David information about audits, schedule changes, and security procedures. She had also been manipulating personnel records to hide David's unauthorized access to certain systems. Margaret sat down heavily, trying to process the betrayal by 2 people she had trusted completely. David Morrison was bad enough, but Sarah was family. They had built Pinnacle Financial together, working 18-hour days and sacrificing personal relationships to make the company successful. The thought that Sarah had been helping someone steal from their family business was almost unbearable. Elena watched Margaret's reaction carefully, knowing that the worst revelations were still to come. She had discovered the connection between David Morrison and Sarah Chen that went beyond simple greed. They were having an affair, and they had been planning to steal enough money to disappear together, leaving Margaret to face the consequences of their theft. Margaret asked Elena how she had uncovered so much information so quickly. Most private investigators would need months or years to build such a comprehensive case, especially working alone and undercover. Elena's explanation was vague. She claimed to have experience with financial crimes and advanced computer skills that allowed her to trace digital transactions. But Margaret's business instincts were telling her that Elena's story didn't completely add up. No private investigator worked this efficiently without inside knowledge or personal motivation. Elena knew too much about Pinnacle Financial's systems and procedures, understood the company's organizational structure too well, and had access to information that should have been impossible to obtain. As the evening progressed, Margaret began asking more personal questions about Elena's background and experience. Elena answered carefully, providing just enough information to maintain credibility without revealing too much. She claimed to have worked for a large investigation firm in Chicago before moving to freelance work. Margaret's curiosity was becoming dangerous territory for Elena. The CEO was smart, experienced, and not easily fooled. Elena realized that maintaining her cover story was becoming more difficult with each passing hour. Margaret's questions were becoming more specific and harder to deflect. Elena made a decision that would change everything between them. She told Margaret that there was one more piece of evidence that would complete the case against David Morrison and Sarah Chen, but retrieving it would require accessing Sarah's personal computer from her home office. This would mean breaking into Margaret's sister's house, and Elena needed Margaret's help to do it. Margaret stared at Elena in the dim light of the hidden office, realizing that her life was about to become much more complicated. She was being asked to choose between family loyalty and business survival, between legal procedures and immediate justice. Elena Rodriguez Stevenson was asking her to cross lines that successful CEOs never crossed, and Margaret found herself seriously considering it. Margaret spent a sleepless night wrestling with Elena's proposal. Breaking into her sister's house felt wrong on every level, but the evidence of Sarah's betrayal was overwhelming. By morning, she had made her decision. She would help Elena get the final proof needed to expose the theft and protect her company. They met at a coffee shop several blocks from Pinnacle Financial to discuss the plan. Elena had done her homework, knowing Sarah's schedule, security system, and the layout of her house. She explained that Sarah would be out of town for 2 days at a human resources conference, providing the perfect opportunity to search her home office. Margaret felt like she was stepping into someone else's life as they drove to Sarah's suburban house. She had been there dozens of times for family dinners and holidays, but never as an intruder. Elena parked down the street and pulled out professional-looking tools that made Margaret wonder about her real background. Elena disabled Sarah's security system with surprising ease, using techniques that went far beyond what any private investigator should know. Margaret watched in amazement as Elena bypassed the electronic locks and motion sensors like someone with military or law enforcement training. Her suspicions about Elena's true identity grew stronger with each passing minute. Inside Sarah's house, Elena moved with purpose toward the home office. She knew exactly where to look, which files to examine, and which computer systems to access. Margaret realized that Elena had been here before, had studied the house layout, and probably had been investigating Sarah for much longer than she had admitted. Elena found what she was looking for in Sarah's personal computer: encrypted files containing detailed financial records, communication logs with David Morrison, and most damaging of all, a complete plan for stealing $2 million and disappearing to a non-extradition country. The theft was much larger than Elena had originally revealed, and the timeline for their escape was just 3 weeks away. As Elena copied the files, Margaret explored Sarah's office and made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in a desk drawer was a collection of old photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings that told a story Margaret had never heard before. The materials were about a family named Rodriguez, including articles about a tragic accident and legal proceedings that had destroyed their lives. Margaret studied the photographs and felt a shock of recognition. One of the pictures showed a young girl who looked remarkably similar to Elena, standing next to a woman who could have been her older sister. The newspaper articles told the story of Maria Rodriguez, an accountant who had been wrongly accused of embezzlement and had committed suicide rather than face trial in prison. Elena looked up from the computer and saw Margaret holding the photographs. The moment she had been dreading for 23 years had finally arrived. Margaret's face showed confusion, recognition, and the beginning of understanding. Elena knew that her carefully constructed cover story was about to collapse completely. Margaret remembered the Rodriguez case clearly now. 23 years ago, when she was a junior accountant at Morrison & Associates, she had discovered financial irregularities that pointed to embezzlement. She had reported her findings to the senior partners, who had used her analysis to build a case against Maria Rodriguez, the company's head of accounting. The prosecution had relied heavily on Margaret's forensic work to prove that Maria Rodriguez had been stealing money through fake vendor payments and altered contracts. Maria had proclaimed her innocence throughout the trial, claiming that someone else was responsible for the theft and that she was being framed. But Margaret's analysis seemed to prove Maria's guilt beyond doubt. Elena Rodriguez Stevenson was really Elena Rodriguez, Maria's younger sister. She had been 17 when Maria killed herself in jail, unable to face the shame and disgrace of the false accusations. Elena had spent the next 23 years learning about financial investigations, accounting procedures, and corporate security, all in preparation for this moment. Margaret realized that Elena had not been investigating random embezzlement at Pinnacle Financial. She had orchestrated the entire situation, manipulating David Morrison and Sarah Chen, providing them with opportunities to steal, and carefully documenting their crimes. Elena had created the perfect parallel to what had happened to her sister, but this time the guilty parties would actually be caught and punished. Elena stood up slowly, her disguise finally abandoned completely. She told Margaret the truth about Maria Rodriguez. Her sister had been innocent, framed by the real thief who had used Maria's access codes and forged her signatures to steal money from Morrison and Associates. The real thief had been David Morrison Sr., the founder's son, who had later inherited the company and used his wealth and influence to bury the truth. Margaret felt the weight of 23 years of guilt crashing down on her. Her forensic analysis had been accurate, but she had been given false information and manipulated evidence. David Morrison Sr. had fed her altered documents and coached her conclusions, using her reputation and expertise to destroy an innocent woman's life. Elena revealed that David Morrison Jr., the man stealing from Pinnacle Financial, was the son of the man who had framed her sister. Elena had spent years tracking the Morrison family, learning about their business practices and waiting for the perfect opportunity for revenge. Margaret's company had been chosen specifically because of Margaret's role in her sister's death. Margaret stared at Elena in the dim light of Sarah's office, understanding finally that she was not just witnessing justice, but participating in an elaborate revenge plot that had been 23 years in the making. Elena Rodriguez had devoted her entire adult life to this moment, and Margaret was both the instrument of her revenge and its ultimate target. The two women faced each other across Sarah's desk, surrounded by evidence of past and present crimes, knowing that their confrontation would determine not just the fate of David Morrison and Sarah Chen, but the resolution of a tragedy that had begun before either of them understood how deeply their lives were connected. The silence in Sarah's office stretched between Margaret and Elena like a chasm, filled with 23 years of pain, guilt, and carefully planned revenge. Margaret set down the photographs with shaking hands, finally understanding the weight of decisions she had made as a young accountant. Elena watched her carefully, seeing the recognition and remorse in Margaret's eyes. Elena began to tell the complete story of what had happened after Maria Rodriguez's suicide. Their parents had never recovered from the scandal and shame. Their father had lost his job at the bank when the Rodriguez name became associated with embezzlement. Their mother had fallen into depression and died 5 years later, from what the doctors called a broken heart. But Elena knew was really despair. Elena had been left alone at 22. With no family and a last name that made finding work in finance impossible, she had legally changed her name, moved across the country, and dedicated herself to learning everything about financial crimes, corporate security, and investigation techniques. Every skill she had developed, every connection she had made, had been in service of this moment. Margaret listened to Elena's story with growing horror at the cascade of destruction that had followed her forensic report. She had believed she was doing the right thing, following proper procedures and helping her company recover stolen money. Instead, she had been a tool in David Morrison Sr.'s scheme to destroy an innocent woman and her family. Elena revealed that she had been tracking Margaret for 15 years, studying her career, her business practices, and her personal life. When Margaret founded Pinnacle Financial, Elena had seen the perfect opportunity for revenge. She had researched every employee, every client, and every vendor, looking for the right leverage point. David Morrison Jr. had been that leverage point. Elena had discovered his gambling debts, his financial problems, and his weak character through months of careful investigation. She had then engineered situations that put David in contact with Sarah Chen, knowing that Margaret's sister was lonely after her divorce and vulnerable to manipulation. Elena admitted that she had orchestrated David and Sarah's affair, providing them with opportunities to meet, information about each other's interests, and even anonymous tips about Margaret's travel schedule that gave them time alone together. Every step of their relationship had been guided by Elena's invisible hand. The embezzlement scheme had been Elena's design, fed to David Morrison through carefully planted suggestions and anonymous tips about security weaknesses in Pinnacle Financial systems. Elena had even helped David create the shell companies and fake vendor accounts, making sure every transaction left a clear digital trail that could be followed and documented. Margaret realized that Elena had manipulated everyone involved, including her. Elena had taken the janitorial job specifically to get close to Margaret, to study her habits and reactions, and to position herself as the heroic investigator who would save Pinnacle Financial from theft. Even Margaret's decision to follow Elena that first night had been planned and orchestrated. Elena showed Margaret additional evidence she had been hiding, recordings of conversations between David and Sarah, photographs of their meetings, and detailed financial records that proved Elena had been controlling the theft from the beginning. David and Sarah thought they were master criminals, but they were actually puppets in Elena's elaborate revenge scheme. Margaret asked Elena what she wanted: money, public confession, or simply the destruction of Margaret's life and business. Elena's answer was more complex than Margaret expected. She wanted justice for her sister, acknowledgement of the truth about what had happened 23 years ago, and the satisfaction of proving that the real criminals could be caught and punished when the investigation was honest. But Elena also revealed something that surprised both of them. During the months of watching and studying Margaret, Elena had come to respect her target. Margaret was not the corrupt accountant Elena had imagined, but an honest businesswoman who had been manipulated just as thoroughly as Maria Rodriguez had been. Elena's feelings about her revenge had become complicated by admiration for Margaret's integrity and business ethics. Elena offered Margaret a choice that would determine both their futures. They could work together to expose David Morrison Jr. and Sarah Chen, using Elena's evidence to prosecute them for theft and fraud. Margaret's company would be saved, her sister would face justice, and Elena would have her revenge against the Morrison family. Or Margaret could call the police, turn Elena in for breaking and entering, fraud and conspiracy, and try to protect her sister from prosecution. Elena would probably go to prison, David Morrison would probably escape with most of the stolen money, and Pinnacle Financial would likely collapse under the weight of the financial scandal and family betrayal. Margaret stared at Elena, understanding that this decision would define not just her business future, but her moral character. Elena had given her the power to choose between justice and family loyalty, between truth and protection, between revenge and forgiveness. The choice would determine whether Maria Rodriguez's death would finally be balanced by justice or compounded by more tragedy. Elena waited patiently for Margaret's answer, knowing that 23 years of planning had led to this single moment of decision. Everything that had happened since Maria Rodriguez's suicide had been building toward Margaret's choice in Sarah's home office, surrounded by evidence of past and present crimes, facing the sister of the woman whose life she had unknowingly helped destroy. Margaret looked at the photographs of Maria Rodriguez, then at Elena's face. Seeing the family resemblance and the weight of years of pain and determination, she knew that whatever she decided in the next few minutes would echo through the rest of both their lives, just as her forensic report had echoed through the past 23 years. Margaret walked to the window of Sarah's office and stared out at the quiet suburban street where she had attended birthday parties, family dinners, and holiday celebrations. The weight of Elena's revelation and the choice before her felt heavier than all the business decisions she had ever made combined. Behind her, Elena waited silently, understanding that this moment would determine whether 23 years of planning would end in justice or tragedy. After several minutes of reflection, Margaret turned back to Elena with a decision that surprised them both. She would help Elena expose David Morrison and Sarah Chen, but only if Elena agreed to also help her uncover the complete truth about what had happened to Maria Rodriguez 23 years ago. Margaret wanted to understand exactly how David Morrison Sr. had manipulated her forensic analysis and used her reputation to frame an innocent woman. Elena agreed immediately, realizing that Margaret was offering something she had never dared hope for, the chance to completely clear her sister's name and expose the real criminal who had destroyed her family. Together, they would have access to resources and connections that Elena could never have reached alone. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret and Elena worked together with an intensity that amazed them both. Margaret used her business connections and legal resources to investigate Morrison and Associates, while Elena used her investigative skills to track down witnesses and evidence from 23 years ago. What they discovered was worse than either had imagined. David Morrison Sr. had not just framed Maria Rodriguez for his own theft. He had been systematically stealing from clients for over a decade. Using his position and reputation to avoid suspicion, Maria had stumbled upon evidence of his crimes and had been preparing to expose him when he decided to frame her instead. Her death had been the direct result of his calculated decision to destroy her, rather than face justice. Margaret found records that proved David Morrison Sr. had altered the documents she had analyzed, coached witnesses to lie, and even bribed auditors to support the case against Maria Rodriguez. Her forensic work had been accurate, but the foundation it was built on had been completely fabricated. Margaret realized that she had been as much a victim of Morrison's manipulation as Maria had been. Elena discovered that David Morrison Sr. had used the same framing technique against at least 3 other employees over the years, always choosing people who were isolated, vulnerable, and unlikely to be believed against his word. Maria Rodriguez had been just one victim in a pattern of systematic destruction that had made Morrison wealthy and powerful. While building their case against the elder Morrison, Margaret and Elena also gathered the final evidence needed to prosecute David Morrison, Jr. and Sarah Chen. Elena's months of careful documentation had created an unshakable legal case that would result in significant prison sentences for both thieves. The confrontation came on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 month after Margaret had first followed Elena through the empty hallways of Pinnacle Financial. Margaret called an emergency board meeting, with Sarah and David both required to attend. Elena was there as well, no longer hiding her identity or her purpose. Margaret presented the evidence against Sarah and David methodically, professionally, and without emotion. Bank records, forged documents, recordings of their conversations, and digital forensics that proved their guilt beyond any doubt. Both Sarah and David tried to deny the charges, but Elena's documentation was too thorough and too detailed to challenge. Sarah broke down when she realized the scope of Elena's investigation and the certainty of prosecution. She confessed not only to her own crimes, but also revealed additional details about David's theft that Elena had not yet discovered. The total amount stolen was close to $3 million. Much more than anyone had realized. David Morrison Jr. tried to maintain his innocence until Elena revealed her true identity and explained his father's connection to Maria Rodriguez's death. The realization that his victim was the sister of a woman his father had destroyed shocked David into silence. He could see the justice in Elena's revenge, even as it destroyed his own life. Margaret felt no satisfaction in watching her sister's arrest or David Morrison's downfall. The betrayal still hurt, and the family relationships destroyed by the theft would never be repaired. But she also felt a strange sense of completion, knowing that Maria Rodriguez's death was finally being balanced by genuine justice rather than more manipulation and lies. Elena watched the arrests with emotions she had not expected. The revenge she had planned for 23 years felt different than she had imagined. There was satisfaction in seeing the Morrison family finally face consequences for their crimes, but also sadness for the relationships and lives that had been destroyed in the process. 6 months later, both David Morrison Jr. and Sarah Chen were serving prison sentences for embezzlement and fraud. Elena's investigation had also led to posthumous charges against David Morrison Sr. and the recovery of millions of dollars he had stolen from clients over his career. Maria Rodriguez's name was officially cleared, and her family's reputation was finally restored. Margaret and Elena had developed an unlikely friendship through their collaboration, built on shared understanding of how the past could shape the present in unexpected ways. Elena had found the justice she sought, but also something she had not expected: forgiveness from the woman she had originally planned to destroy. Margaret hired Elena as Pinnacle Financial's new head of security, recognizing that Elena's unique skills and perspective would help protect the company from future threats. Elena accepted the position, finally able to use her expertise in service of justice rather than revenge. On quiet evenings, when the office building was empty and the city lights twinkled beyond the windows, Margaret sometimes thought about that first night when she had followed the mysterious janitor into her hidden past. The encounter had cost her a sister, a trusted executive, and millions of dollars, but it had also given her something more valuable: the knowledge that even the worst mistakes could be balanced by genuine justice, and that redemption was possible even after 23 years of pain.